talk of President Trump waiving the federal gasoline tax. So I really quickly wanted to jump in and talk about what that could mean for motorists in the days ahead. Now, for those that don't know, a federal gas tax pause or diesel, I will talk about that as well, would reduce gas prices rather quickly. It depends on when this would become effective. It would need congressional approval. That could be fraught with some challenges as Washington, D.C. and Congress has been relatively divisive in the last couple of months. So, what it could mean if the federal gas tax is waived on gasoline, it could potentially reduce prices by the 18.4 cent per gallon gasoline tax itself. For diesel, it could reduce prices 23.4 cents is the federal tax on diesel. So essentially waiving these taxes if Congress approves it could be very swift. This would be a tax that would no longer have to be collected depending on how it's worded by retailers. And so very quickly, if the tax suspension became effective, say May 25th, motorists would effectively on May 25th see a potential major reduction of 18.4 cents for gasoline and up to about 23.4 cents for diesel. So it would reduce price rather quickly across much of the country. The real question, though, is whether or not you see that 18.4 cent reduction for gasoline and 23.4 cent reduction in diesel is really what's going on in the backdrop. Is the price of oil actively going up the same time that this tax suspension would become effective? If so, if oil is actively climbing, if the Strait of Hormuz continues to be closed, motorists may not actually see that 18.4 cent reduction at the pump very quickly. It could be masked by a corresponding rise in the wholesale price of gasoline. Now, if oil prices are falling at the same time this gasoline tax suspension becomes effective, then you may see that full 18.4 cents. You may even see a little bit more of that if the price of oil has actively plummeted at the same time that this legislation is approved and signed by President Trump. So it really depends on the timing. Now, I've never seen a gas tax holiday that has not been passed along by retailers. That's a popular question. A lot of the time, motorists say, well, stations are just going to absorb this or they're going to pocket it. I've never seen that. We generally see that because stations have a competitive advantage, they're able to lower prices. That generally, I would say, north of 95% of gas tax holidays and diesel tax holidays are indeed passed along. The timing can be different at the state and federal level. Sometimes states tax the wholesale price of gasoline, and so stations may have to sell through the fuel that they already bought at a taxed rate. In this case, though, I believe, depending on how the law is written, it should take effect faster because essentially the federal gas tax impacts gasoline as it's being sold, not at the wholesale level. So, in theory, if the federal gasoline tax and diesel tax are waived, it would very quickly reduce prices by 18.4 cents and by about 23.4 cents for diesel, respectively, relatively quickly. That would cost the federal government about $2.1 billion in lost revenue every month that gasoline tax is suspended. So there is a cost to this. The Federal Highway Trust Fund is already relatively low. Gasoline and federal diesel taxes have not been increased since 1993. And this is a primary source of revenue for maintaining and building interstates. So there is a part of this that's concerning. From an economist perspective, it's also concerning that as supply is being disrupted, undercutting the price of gasoline and diesel may actually incentivize and slightly stimulate demand. And that could exacerbate the situation we find ourselves in now, where the Strait of Hormuz imbalance has caused these price increases. Nevertheless, at 4.48 a gallon, which is where the national average is, an 18.4 cent reduction would still add up to a few dollars every tank, every fill up, depending on how big your tank is, and it would take effect rather quickly. So, if Congress does approve this, if the president signs it into law, it would essentially reduce prices 18.4 cents for gasoline and 23.4 cents for diesel. How quickly you see it is really just contingent on what oil prices are doing at the time that this law becomes effective. If oil prices are going up actively as this law becomes effective, you probably wouldn't notice the full 18-cent reduction because it could be offset by rising prices. If the price of oil is actively falling at the same time that this legislation becomes effective, then you may eventually see more of that reduction. You could see more of a reduction than the 18.4 cents a gallon. So just wanted to clarify, clear a few of those misconceptions up, but it would reduce gasoline prices potentially temporarily, depending on how long the tax holiday proceeds for. So just wanted to clue you in again. I'm Patrick DeHaan, head of petroleum analysis at Gas Buddy, talking about the potential for a federal gas tax suspension on gasoline and diesel. Certainly would reduce prices, but it would leave gas prices in an elevated state. Overall, the Strait of Hormuz is the biggest reason why gas prices are elevated. The national average today about 447 for gasoline and 562 for diesel. This would have some short level of impact. So just wanted to highlight that for you today. Thanks for joining. Again, I'm Patrick DeHaan, Petroleum Analysis, a Gas Buddy. See you next time.